How changing your story can change your life. Incomplete or false narratives might keep you in the dark rather than bringing you clarity. Stories help you make sense of your existence. Lori Gottlieb, a psychologist and advice writer, explains in a practical lecture how to stop believing the lies you've been telling yourself by taking charge of your own editing and rewriting your story from a different perspective. I'll start by telling you about a recent email I came across in my inbox. As a therapist who publishes a column called Dear Therapist, you can imagine the weird things that end up in my email. I mean, I've read tens of thousands of incredibly private letters from people I've never met. And the topics covered in these letters range from grief and loss to arguments with parents or siblings. The folder I keep them in on my laptop is called The Problems of Living, so I received this email, as well as many more exactly like it. And I'd like to briefly invite you into my world by reading you one of these letters. The process is as follows. Good afternoon, Mr. I've been married for 10 years, and everything were going well until recently. Since then, my spouse has become considerably less interested in having sex, and now we hardly ever do. You guys probably weren't prepared for this. Well, last night I found out he's been covertly talking on long, late-night phone calls with a woman at his office for the previous few months. I found her on Google, and she is stunning. That this is happening is unfathomable. When I was a young child, my father had a relationship with a coworker that tore our family apart. I am obviously devastated. I will never be able to trust my husband again if I stay in this marriage. But I don't want to subject our children to a divorce, having a stepmom, etc. What should I do? What do you believe she ought to do, then? If you received this letter, you could be considering how awful adultery is right now. Or perhaps she will talk about how difficult it is for her because of what it was like for her to grow up with her father. And if you're anything like me, you'd probably feel some sympathy for this woman and perhaps even harbor some, let's just say, not so positive feelings toward her husband. Now, when I read these letters in my inbox, those are the kinds of thoughts that also cross my mind. But since I am aware that each letter I receive is simply a narrative produced by a certain author, I have to exercise extreme caution when responding to these messages. And that there are other versions of this narrative. It constantly does. We are all unreliable narrators of our own lives, and if there's one thing I've learned as a therapist, it's that I am. You do. Everyone you know is, too. You won't believe my TED Talk now, so I probably shouldn't have told you that. Look, I'm not saying we intentionally mislead. Most of what people tell me is entirely accurate, albeit from their particular points of view at the time. They tell their stories in different ways depending on what they want me to focus on or ignore, what they emphasize or minimize, what they include or exclude, etc. Jerome Bruner, a psychologist, put it best when he said, to tell a story is, inescapably, to take a moral stance. We all carry life stories with us wherever we go. Why decisions were made, why things went wrong, why we treated someone a certain way, even though it was obvious that they deserved it, and why someone else treated us a certain way. We make meaning of our lives through stories. What transpires, though, when the tales we tell are false, insufficient, or simply incorrect? These stories don't provide us any answers, they only keep us in the dark. We presume that our stories are shaped by the circumstances. But in my studies, I consistently discovered that the exact reverse occurs. What our lives become is shaped by how we describe them. That is both the strength and the danger of our stories, because they have the potential to really mess us up. We can change our lives if we can change our stories, which is what it means. And I want to demonstrate how today. I'm not being an unreliable narrator, like I said, I'm a therapist, and I truly am. However, if someone asks me what I do while, say, flying, I typically respond that I'm an editor. I mention this mainly because whenever I mention that I'm a therapist, I always receive an awkward response, such as, "Oh, a counselor. Will you have me undergo psychoanalysis?" And I consider, no, and why would I do that in this situation? Would you inquire if I was about to perform a pelvic exam on you if I introduced myself as a gynecologist? But the main reason I identify as an editor is that it is the case. All therapists must assist clients in editing, but what's remarkable about my work as Dear Therapist is that I don't simply edit for one client at a time. Using one letter every week as an example, I'm attempting to instruct a large group of readers on the editing process. I therefore consider questions like, what material is extraneous? Are the supporting characters crucial or are they just a diversion? And is the heroine making progress or is she running around in circles? Does the theme emerge from the story points? And I've found that the majority of people's stories tend to revolve around two main themes. Freedom and change are the first and second, respectively. And those are the concepts I begin with when I edit. So let's consider freedom for a moment. We believe that we enjoy a great deal of freedom in general according to our stories about freedom. However, when it comes to the current issue, we suddenly feel as though we lack any solutions. We write about feeling trapped in a lot of our stories, right? Our families, jobs, relationships, and pasts make us feel as though we are prisoners. Sometimes, we even confine ourselves to a self-flagellation narrative. I'm sure you guys have heard these tales. Social media is to blame for the everyone's life is better than mine narrative. The I'm a fraud narrative, I'm unlovable, and nothing will ever work out for me narratives. The myth that if I call Siri and she doesn't respond, it signifies I'm a terrible person. You see, I'm not the only one, I see you. The same way I do, the woman who wrote me that letter feels imprisoned. She won't ever be able to trust her husband again if she stays with him, but if she leaves, her kids will suffer. There is a cartoon that, in my opinion, perfectly illustrates what is actually happening in these cases. A prisoner is depicted in the cartoon frantically attempting to escape by shaking the bars. It is open on the right and left, though. 0 bars, the inmate is not incarcerated. That describes the majority of us. We feel totally entrapped and imprisoned inside our emotional chambers. But since we are aware that there is a catch, we don't try to escape through the bars. The price of freedom is accountability. And if we acknowledge our part in the narrative, we might even have to change. Change is the other frequent theme I notice in our stories. In some tales, someone declares, "I want to change." They actually mean, though, "I want another character in the story to change." The saying, "if the queen had balls, she'd be the king," is how therapists characterize this predicament. I mean, it's absurd, isn't it? Why wouldn't we want the protagonist, the story's hero, to transform? It could be due to the unexpected amount of loss that change, even truly positive change, entails. Loss of the comfortable. Even if the familiar is unpleasant or downright miserable, at least we are familiar with the story's characters, setting, and overall plot. You never wash your clothes. I already did it once. Oh, right? When? Knowing exactly how the story would end every time has a peculiarly comfortable effect. A new chapter represents a step into the unknown. It entails gazing at an empty page. There is nothing more unnerving than a blank page, as every writer would attest. But consider this, the subsequent chapter is considerably simpler to write once our story has been edited. In our society, there is a lot of talk about knowing oneself. But learning about yourself also involves learning about who you are not. In order to live your life and not the fiction you have been telling yourself about it, you must let go of the one version of the story you have been telling yourself. And that is the way we navigate those bars. I want to return to the woman's letter regarding the affair. She inquired as to my advice. I now have the following phrase posted up in my office: ultracrepidarianism. the practice of offering opinions or advice that is unfounded in experience or expertise. I know, it's a great word. You can use it in a variety of situations, and after watching this TED Talk, I have no doubt that you will. I use it as a reminder that, even though I work as a therapist, I cannot decide for other people what they should do with their lives. Your story can only be written by you, and all you need are some tools. In order to demonstrate how we can all modify our tales, I want to edit this woman's letter together right now. I want to start by asking you to consider a self-defeating story you might be telling yourself right now. It may be about a situation you're going through, about someone in your life, or even about yourself. I also want you to pay attention to the supporting players. Who are the individuals supporting the incorrect version of this narrative that you are promoting? For instance, if the person who wrote me that letter explained what had happened to her friends, they would likely show her what is referred to as idiot compassion. When a friend complains that he didn't get the promotion he wanted, we go along with the story out of stupid compassion and say, "You're right, that's so unfair," even though we know that this has happened several times before because he doesn't really put in the effort and most likely also steals office supplies. When a friend tells us that her boyfriend dumped her, we respond, "Yeah, you're right, he's a jerk," even though we are aware that certain behaviors she has a tendency to exhibit in relationships, such as her constant texting or digging through his drawers, frequently result in this outcome. The issue is that if a fight breaks out in every bar you visit, it may very well be you. We need to practice intelligent compassion toward ourselves as well as our friends in order to be effective editors. This is what is referred to as delivering compassionate truth bombs, which may be the technical word. Additionally, these truth bombs are kind because they enable us to recognize what we have omitted from the narrative. In actuality, we have no idea whether this woman's husband is having an affair, why their sexual life altered 2 years ago, or the true purpose of those late-night phone conversations. She may be writing a unique account of betrayal as a result of her past, but there is likely something else she is hiding from me in her letter, possibly even from herself. It reminds me of the Rorschach test guy. What are Rorschach tests? Do you all know? What do you observe when a psychologist shows you some ink blots that look like that? So the man adds, "Well, I definitely don't see blood," after examining his ink stain. "Okay, tell me what else you absolutely don't notice," the examiner continues. This is referred to as point of view in writing. What does the narrator refuse to accept? I'll read you one more letter as a result. And it goes as follows. "Good afternoon, Mr. Help with my wife is needed. Everything I do these days aggravates her, even little things like the sound I make when I chew. She even tries to sneakily add additional milk to my cereal at breakfast to make it less crunchy, I discovered. I think she started criticizing me after my father passed away 2 years ago. She couldn't understand what I was going through because I was really close to him and her father abandoned her when she was a little child. A friend of mine at work, whose father passed away a few months ago, can relate to my sorrow. My wife barely tolerates me anymore, and I wish I could chat to her like I do with my friend. What can I do to win my wife back?" Okay. So, as you may have guessed, this is the same narrative I read you previously, recounted from the perspective of a different narrator. His narrative is about a woman who cannot comprehend his anguish, while her story is about an unfaithful husband. However, what strikes me as striking is that despite their differences, both of these stories center on a desire for connection. And if we can shift from first-person narration and tell the tale from the viewpoint of another character, that character instantly has a lot more sympathy and the narrative widens. Although it's the most difficult, it's also where change starts in the editing process. What would happen if you rewrote your tale from the perspective of someone else? What do you perceive right now from this broader angle? Because depression distorts our stories in a very specific way, I sometimes tell depressed people that I am not the best person to talk to them about themselves right now. It limits our viewpoints. The same holds true when we experience rejection, loneliness, or hurt. We make up all kinds of tales that are distorted by a very limited lens that we aren't even aware we are using. Then, we effectively started broadcasting fake news ourselves. I must admit something. The letter I read you was written by me in the husband's voice. By the way, you have no clue how much time I wasted debating whether to choose pita chips or granola. I drafted it based on every alternate narrative I've encountered over the years, both in my column and in my counseling practice. When two people who were unaware of one another and involved in the same situation wrote to me resulted in me receiving two different accounts of the same events. That actually did occur. I'm not sure what the other side of this woman's letter is, but she must write it, that much is certain. Because she will bravely revise the letter she wrote to me to make it much more complex. She doesn't need to know the details of the affair just yet, even if her husband is having one of any type, and maybe he is. Because simply by editing, she will have a lot more options for how the story might develop. Now, occasionally, I come across people who are really stuck and wholly committed to remaining stuck. They are referred to as help-rejecting complainers. You probably know someone like this. They're the ones that reject suggestions you make by saying, "Yeah, no, that will never work, because..." "Yeah, no, I can't do that. That's impossible. Yes, I really want more friends, but everyone irritates me so much." Their story of pain and immobility has been edited, which is what they are actually rejecting. And therefore, when dealing with them, I typically use a different strategy. And I respond by saying something different. "We're all going to die," I tell them. "You must be really relieved that I'm not serving as your therapist right now." Because of the expression of complete astonishment on their faces when they return my gaze, just like you are doing now. I go on to say, however, that a story is eventually written about each and every one of us. It is known as an obituary. And I assert that we get to write these stories while we are still living, rather than being the creators of our own misery. We get to choose what appears on the page that exists in our brains and influences our reality, making us the hero and not the victim in our stories. I explain to them that choosing which stories to listen to and which ones require editing is what life is all about. And that revising is worthwhile because the tales we tell ourselves about our lives are the most crucial factor in determining how well they turn out. I contend that we ought to strive for our own unique Pulitzer Prize when it comes to the narrative of our lives. Now, the most of us don't, or at least don't think we do, reject help-rejecting whiners. However, it's a position that is quite simple to adopt when we feel fearful, irate, or defenseless. So keep in mind that we're all going to die the next time you're having a hard time. After that, take out your editing tools and consider what you want your story to be. Write your masterpiece after that. I'm grateful.